Hey, welcome to episode 160 of Decentralized Revolution, the Mises Caucus podcast. As usual, we're running a few minutes late. Kind of some technical difficulties as it happens, seems like every week. Last week it was really bad, but we got those worked out. Austin Padgett's with me this week. Several weeks ago, 3 or 4 months ago, you guest hosted with Nate
Great.
Thurston. So I'm glad to have you back on.
Excellent. Welcome, Austin. Welcome myself back. I used the wrong
Yeah,
word there, but yes, happy to be back. Exciting times we live in.
it exciting, interesting, maddening, all of those things. And I know you guys got a lot of the storm where you are, and I was supposed to get a lot and I didn't. So
Oh yeah, the ice,
yeah,
the
yeah,
ice storm.
ice is in the news this week.
It
We
was hail snowballs at our
yeah,
house in Texas.
we thought we were really going to get it. Like the whole Knoxville doesn't handle snow and ice well, and like everybody closed preemptively, and we got kind of some ice, and it was kind of slippery one day. And
Hmm.
I was out yesterday, and it was dry as a bone because they had put so much brine and salt on the roads. Like they actually did kind of prepare for this one. They thought it was going to be so bad, and they kind of anyway. So like last Friday, I was like, we might not be able to do a show today because we might not have power, but we do. So
Yep, we made
so
it. We didn't have to
yeah,
use our fire logs after all.
yeah.
But it was
Uh,
funny being from the Northeast, having just an inch of ice and feeling totally powerless against it.
yeah.
Because you don't
Uh,
have the tools. It's a different scenario.
yeah, I grew up in Ohio. It's kind of the same thing. Like when I first moved down here, I had a meeting I was going to with supposed to meet a few people one night, and we got like 3 inches of snow. And I show up, I pull in the parking lot to this place, and there's like one other car, and I text the group. I'm like, hey, and they're like, why are you out? It's snowing. And so like from that day on, I just like learned to adjust my expectations and assume that people are not going to do anything. But
Well, speaking
I,
of expectations, how about the other ice?
yeah,
Is that
let's
what
get
we're
to
getting into? What
yeah
are the
that
show topics today?
just like the Minnesota stuff, the ice stuff, the 2A implications of it all. And I know a lot of people. It's been a heck of a time the last 3 or 4 months for people on the right, really since the aftermath of the Charlie Kirk thing.
Hmm.
um the right has
Yeah.
kind of been one fault line after another. And then obviously with the issue of immigration in particular, both among libertarians and the right in general, and then specifically with ICE and specifically with Minnesota, it's kind of highlighting a lot of tensions, and a lot of people are saying some kind of unhinged things, and you're not a real libertarian or whatever. One thing
Mhm.
I think that's kind of interesting, I always like to step back and look at like context a little bit. Like it's kind of convenient. And I'm not the first one to say this, but like it's pretty amazing that like the huge welfare fraud and just whatever else was going on in Minnesota, and one can assume is going on in most states, not just most blue states, but I mean, that's the nature of how the state funds things. Like it just, there's a gravy train of money, and there's all kinds of stuff going on, but especially in blue states, and apparently, especially in Minnesota, this whole thing kind of, you know, the governor decides not to run again and all this stuff. And then kind of conveniently, all the ICE stuff happens. And just among some of my normie contacts in the real world, like I'm starting to hear some like really unhinged language from people who are kind of generally on the left. So I just thought
Hmm.
to have
Big surprise.
another good Mises style libertarian on to talk about this and sort out where our heads need to be at on this. So
Yeah,
what
so the fraud is, like you said, way more pervasive than people realize, and it's because like Medicare benefits are determined by the states, and then the Fed just believes whatever the state says without checking it, especially like you said, if it's a leftist state, right? So it's a huge pork barrel politics avenue, right? If you
mm,
can just give somebody money and not say anything about it, then you can get away with a lot. more. They'll do what you want in terms of policy. This actually connects to the immigration situation in a different way, because people talk about, oh, how like the Jews made us do mass migration. And there's a lot of problems with that narrative. For example, like Italians and Eastern Europeans were the ones doing the majority of the chain migration,
Hmm.
and Northeastern, you know, Puritan progressives had their own driving impetus on that. But aside from that, an interesting example of factor is, as the US was pursuing globalism and trying to influence the policies of all these countries, right? Like get all these South Asian countries in the TPP, get them to standardize our IP regimes, get them to standardize regulations, get them to not make their corporate tax too low or too high or whatever. And so, you know, so it didn't undercut ours. And if you want people to adopt your policy, one of the best ways to do it is to guarantee their elite class kind of immigration into the US or other parts of the country, right?
Hmm.
If like in India, you have uh, like them being able to come here and get visas is a huge political trading card on their domestic level.
Yep.
Like they will do stuff that you want to be able to do that, to be able to have their family over here, et cetera. So uh, that's another interesting incentive that developed out of a tangent from which I forgot where it originated.
No, I
What
mean,
were we
and
talking
also,
about before that?
well,
Minnesota? Oh,
Minnesota, but
the
also
fraud.
like
Yes, the fraud is more pervasive than you think.
yeah.
So Angela and I talked to the guys at the HHS and other Republican operatives who were high up, and they told us flat out that, yeah, like they've identified a huge, because they looked into where the money's going, and like 20+% of it easily is fraud. Like 20, 30 million people on Medicaid is just fraud, and it's because the states aren't doing any checking, or the Fed isn't doing any checking of the states. So you could actually cut a ridiculous amount of social spending just through fraud. Like you could cut bigger than the military budget in
Yep.
fraud. And they're probably going to make some progress on some of that. I don't know how much of it is dependent on Congress, but that's like the a very realistic place to cut its spending.
Yeah, I mean, as I always I say this on the show all the time, so people who listen to this are tired of hearing me say this, but like, first, Trump has some really good instincts on some things, but it seems like he lacks the attention span or whatever to to kind of follow through on things. He cuts deals, the last person in the room to make a deal with him. But like, imagine if kind of that the Doge energy stuff had actually been sort of codified and not entirely put in charge of put Elon in charge of that, but an actual
Mhm.
team to actually be permanent and do that, and to do the data and to make the case to the American people that yes, this is just straight up fraud, or the whole fraud, waste, and abuse stuff. It's like they've been
Well,
saying that my whole
mhm.
life, but like if you can actually make the case data wise of like, look at how much money that is
Well,
obviously just being
that's what
skimmed.
they're doing. That's
Okay.
literally what they're doing. So the way you describe Doge, like I wish they got some guys in there and did it permanently.
Hmm.
There's a lot of narratives around Doge that are just wrong.
Okay.
I talked to the head Doge data team for HHS in January after the inauguration,
Hmm.
and then they were talking about um, immediately just going into the agency. So having the Doge agency guys not be a part of Doge, they'd be a part of the various agency data teams. They were
Okay.
doing that transition in January. It was
Okay.
always part of the plan. We always knew that Congress wasn't going to codify anything. What they're doing is they're taking over the data systems. They're using AI to analyze all the regulations, find out which ones violate the executive orders, and then sort through and cut that way. So the promise of Doge was always more on the regulatory side. But in terms of the fraud, they're also doing that. They're auditing it, they're getting the numbers. So it's not just like Congress could still not vote on that, if assuming that's dependent on Congress. It might be part of it's dependent on Congress, part of it's not. Maybe they'll vote on an element of it, right? I'm just
Hmm.
not super I don't like to think in a way that makes me reliant on Congress. I usually think, what can I do without? What could we do without Congress?
Right.
Um, but all that stuff is happening with Doge. Like it didn't dissolve. It didn't. Everything that Doge said it was doing, it's doing.
Okay. Well, hopefully that'll bear out. And like you said something in there that some more leftist or like sort of civics class type libertarians might blanch at is like, hey, I want to see what we can do without Congress. And my point to that, and people would say, oh no, Congress decides, where to allocate money and all this stuff. But
Hmm.
in my view, as a libertarian president, if the libertarian president sees something that is unconstitutional, which to be honest, 95% of what, you know,
Yep.
the government does, let's set the defense stuff aside for a second, but
Hmm.
certainly everything non-defense, about 95% of it is unauthorized by the Constitution. So an executive refusing to spend money that is allocated or refusing to enact something, even though Congress says it should, and even
Hmm.
though the Supreme Court says it should, to me, that the executive in that case is acting constitutionally by refusing, by just letting the money
Precisely.
sit in the account and not do it. So like, I don't really want to hear that sort of civics class libertarian thing of like, oh, we
Well,
need to respect
mhm.
separation of powers, because if the one person is doing the constitutional thing in defiance of the other branch or two branches that are telling you to violate the Constitution, as a libertarian, I'm going to go with the guy who is following the letter of the Constitution in favor of liberty. So
Yeah, that's why I hate. Well, first of all, I hate this leftist narrative. It's what they use, as the foundation of their No Kings protest, etc. When in reality, they're the tyrants, and
oh yeah.
cutting unconstitutional bureaucracy is not tyrannical. And then I get really annoyed when people on the right lean into that framing, and they're like, "Yeah, we need to be Napoleon. Napoleon was great, etc., because the state is so big now, we have to use it, etc." And this kind of gets muddled with border and military stuff, which, like you said, is kind of in a different category. And so they use that to muddle the principle.
Mhm.
But it would be better if people actually mentioned what they were talking about instead of talking in these vague terms glorifying Napoleon, because, like you said, 90% of the bureaucracy is unconstitutional. So through the executive and the Supreme Court, which is pretty good, especially on a lot of domestic economic issues,
Yep.
then you can get a huge amount done that way. And it's also the most effective way to do it, because we're not as good at being dictators as the left. If you want to play like those kind of politics, you better at least have some institutions behind you,
Yeah.
which
Uh,
we don't really have any
right.
permanent ones.
Hopefully, yeah, not now, hopefully in the future, but
But the thing with Napoleon is Napoleon was a federalist, right? Because he was a Corsican separatist
mhm.
in his youth. And so he was really the hope of the Federalists, that he was going to shrink the centralized bureaucracy of the communist French Revolution and give more autonomy to the various regions of France.
Okay.
And what he ended up doing is he grew the domestic bureaucracy because he needed that infrastructure for his conquests.
Yep.
And so when you glorify Napoleon, that's kind of like what you're talking about. When what Trump is doing is he's cutting unconstitutional bureaucracy. He's
Right.
cutting massive amounts of regulations. So he's taking the opposite, with school choice alone. That's a very federalist policy. So he's taking the opposite approach of Napoleon there, and we can get into the foreign policy stuff if we want to, or save it for a different conversation. But he's shrinking the bureaucracy, which is more to do with spending. Like you can increase spending for the military while still rolling back an empire.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
you could even consider it paying off the military contractors rather than paying off people for the war in Iraq. Like, what would you rather spend money on? Revamping the military into something actually useful, or another war? So that's kind of an interesting angle
Yeah.
there. But yeah, in general, we don't need to lean into the left's framing of dictatorship to be effective from the executive.
Well, and to specifically back on like the Minnesota protests and stuff is that it seems like there's I said this on, I forget if it was last week or the week before, um and just my thinking about this since this whole thing kind of started, even really before the Renee Good thing, but especially then, I'm like, both sides, I feel like big elements on both the left and the right kind of want this to happen, because I think that the Democrats want this thing to re-energize their people to do kind of what happened in 2020, to, 2020 the demonstrations happened, COVID happened, but so they could oust Trump and steal that election and get Biden in there.
Hmm.
And I think they're kind of really trying to do the same thing now. And this is the type of thing that get people on the left worked up. Again, from my own life, I have a couple of instances of people who just, I'm hearing some very, very unhinged things from like people who were formerly kind of politically dormant. And it's like, it's almost like it's like activating the Android army or something, these sorts of
Hmm.
issues. And so I think the left has wanted these violent clashes, and part of the right, I think, wants it too. And I think the right is, I think they're miscalculating by, I've always said that I think Trump is right to bring, to go after governors and mayors in blue states on things, to kind of
Hmm.
bait them into certain things for political reasons. But I think they may have overplayed their hand on this, because I think the left is going to be more energized. I think that if they, the way the election midterms are looking now, I think the Republicans would kind of just get creamed, because the stuff that they elected Trump to do, the independents, the libertarians, the sort of America first people who stuck with Trump, like he's not, there's a perception that he's not really concerned with those issues so much. And
You
I,
like deportations? Like he's not going to do enough deportations or something?
well, I don't know. Well, I mean, I think the foreign policy stuff, it seems like the focus is off of America first stuff.
Oh,
That
oh, foreign
I
policy.
Yeah,
Got
well,
it.
but I think people do want immigration reform and deportations. They don't want like violence in the streets. And I don't know, how do you thread that needle? I don't know.
Right, right.
But
I
I
want.
yeah, but I just think that, and I think the media wants this violence and stuff like that. And so as a libertarian, I'm just like, I really am not rooting for any side in this, because I just see the potential for
Escalation.
escalation that nobody knows where it's going to go. And that crises like that, war is the health of the state, and war here at home is also the health of the state. And so we could talk about the implications, the 2A stuff that's come up with the second shooting, that a lot of people on the right abandoning, oh, he had a gun, oh, therefore he's a assassin or a terrorist. Well, that's not really our position on things at all. So I see things escalating, and I'm kind of, I don't know where this is
So
going. So
you're kind of seeing a escalation and a potential dystopian crackdown where then the FBI gets to like expand its parameters, and then they undermine some kind of protection against the Second Amendment or some norms or something. I think that's kind of getting a little ahead of the the chain of events.
okay.
In terms of the gun policy, what Cash and Trump said probably could have been better worded. They're not total libertarians on guns in the first place, but there's no law, there's nothing legal changed. There's no precedent that's changed where you can't have a gun at a protest. There's no there That's not actually what they were talking about. It just kind of sounds like that's what they're talking about. You can, if you're mad at Trump, you can, or worried, you can play that up and be like, he's saying he's going to take our guns away. You could also just kind of totally dismiss it
Mm,
as as it's not a good idea to be armed and protesting ICE officers. And you could take that from like a totally neutral libertarian standpoint, right? Where we believe in the Second Amendment, but we also believe that you have to be very careful when you're exercising that option. That's not like a play around option. It can
Yeah.
be like in small targeted circumstances like the Bundys, or it can be in a larger circumstance, but it also depends on the issue. Like, what do we think is worth rebelling against? I don't think we would say that people should go rebel against the deportation of people, which most people support. Maybe some libertarians would disagree with that, but that's totally reasonable for him to say he does. That's not something he thinks people should show up to with guns.
Yeah.
And then also, obviously, like, if it's not that the cop or the ICE guys were like, you have a gun, so we're going to arrest you and shoot you. They
Yeah.
got in an altercation, a scuffle, because the guy came, there was two girls pushing or something, and the guy came in.
Mhm.
Apparently, there was they took the weapon off of him, and maybe it accidentally discharged. I don't know. Then the guy shoots. Maybe he doesn't know, like, if the guy has the weapon on him still, hears a shot. Is he like doing something from his hip?
Yeah.
Maybe he just thought, hey, maybe I'll get away with being able to shoot him right now. And he shot him. Like, anything can happen. I'm not saying that there's no potential for an ICE officer to not shoot somebody, which then comes into the Murray Rothbard quote, unleash the cops, right? And then have liability after, which is what
Yeah.
Trump said about it. He said, we're going to have a really honest, serious investigation about this. Not
Yeah.
like a political investigation, one way or the other, where they're like going to hang someone like the George Floyd one, even though he
Yep.
was following cop protocol. And so yeah, it's like unleash the cops and have liability. So like what I think people are making the most of a situation because it's political noise.
Yep.
I see it as a lot of political noise. I agree that political noise could turn into something potentially, but it's political noise, and it's interesting what um, Tim Walz did with his meeting with Trump, because it makes me wonder, because right now the Minnesota cops are shutting down the riots for ICE. Like,
Okay.
that wasn't happening before. Before, they were passing out donuts to the rioters. Like, that's a big change. There's leftists all over Tim Walz's office protesting him right now, freaking out because they're saying he sold out, because their cops, which were supposed to be on the side of the protesters, are now shutting down the riots. So then I
Right.
wonder, it's like, is this the trade for Tim Walz getting out of his welfare fraud?
Yeah.
Because like you said, there's a lot of wrenches that leftist politicians, judges, deep state can throw into the gears of progress and the revival of America. And it kind of makes you think of other political prosecutions, like, what unknown kind of factors are there here?
Yeah.
If you prosecute this person, is MI6 going to try and bomb one of Russia's fleets to escalate the war to
Yeah.
undermine Trump? Like, is Tim Walz going to try and start a chain of riots? Like, you don't. There's all this kind of these interesting hidden factors, and if you've run an organization or been behind the scenes of an organization like Mises, there's constantly things that are impossible to explain,
Yeah.
that and that people are chattering where they don't know what the hell they're talking about. It's
No,
just
I've
constantly like that.
Austin, I've never experienced that as part of the Mises Caucus and the LP ever. I'm kidding.
Yeah.
Obviously, you're
So,
right.
and I mean, honestly, speaking with Trump helped me reframe my approach a little bit more this way, because I was like, I couldn't just talk shit. I had to, like, if I wanted to bring up a serious complaint, I had to like base it in something and be like, I don't understand these constraints, like acknowledge unknown constraints, and
Yep.
like try and figure out more information. And then, because most of the stuff that you can say online, they've thought of, like, any debate about something Mises was doing, right? Anything people said in the comments, it was like, yeah, we thought of that, we know that, we thought of that. There's this thing, there's this problem, there's this issue.
Yeah.
So unless you're like talking about the solutions, then it's a little bit just chatter.
Right.
um and so
And I
with the ICE case, sure, maybe better training or something, but like what specifically and how does that intersect with the unions and these different lobbies and like,
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, and that's one thing again as libertarians that we know that, police, ICE, the FBI, whatever you want to call it, whatever, not what you want to call it, but whatever branch that you're considering, it is a government agency. Government agencies are not known for efficiency, accountability, excellence, things like that. And and ramping up to do a big operation, hiring new people, maybe putting people in the field who previously weren't in the field. So we know even highly trained cops do bad things all the
right. And
time and
this
get
guy was
away.
on ice for 8 years or whatever.
Right. And also like with most police law enforcement, their training is not to de-escalate and not to get a a, a situation handled peacefully.
Right.
It's accomplish
Control. Right.
mission and go home, and
A
me and
lot.
my buddies are going to go home at the end of the shift, right?
Right.
And so they often do overreact um, to any sort of threat or
Hmm.
perceived threat. Oh, I thought he had a gun. It was a cell phone, whatever. That stuff
Right.
happens all the time. We can go back and watch cop black videos from now until doomsday, and we see
Hmm.
that happens. So anytime you deploy the government agents with guns to do things, you're gonna have stuff happen like this. And so that's kind of the same thing of like Ron Paul was like, hey, I don't want to build a wall because it's going to be used to keep us in. So like there are going to be uh there's going to be collateral damage from
Side
things
effects.
like this. And
Hmm.
again, you don't want murderers, we have to have cops in the world we live in now, not the ANCAP world that we want to live in. In
Right.
the world we live in now, the government's going to do some things. We should have strict liability, and we should, like the Rothbard quote, go in and through that after action stuff, holding them accountable legally and professionally and trying to do more to make them accountable. That's the way to do it.
Yeah.
Ending the qualified immunity, making one thing I've always been in favor of is making cops personally have personal then malpractice insurance that they could get through their unions and stuff. Like so many professions, you have to have that
Yep.
insurance
That's a
to
classic
yeah.
market talking point there.
Right. So those are the things we need to move toward. And the left libertarian argument, which I'm sympathetic to, and in some ways, like culturally, I'm very conservative, but some things with law enforcement and stuff like that, I have a strong left libertarian pull on some things. But the argument of like, oh, the cops are bad, therefore anything the cops do to enforce any law is bad. Well, again,
Right.
we kind of live in a real world. I would love to take that position in a debate, but in the real world, um, again, not to let them off the hook, not to say, oh, we have to cut down on immigration, so unleash ICE with no consequences.
Right.
But we do
Or
have
like, no, we have to figure out private policing before we deal with this immigration problem. That'll
right,
probably
right.
take a while. Yeah.
Yeah, we could have Bob Murphy and whomever else drop a plan for private policing and all that.
And private
And
policing could only work from like a small locality expanded. It would have to be like a decentralized.
right. And so we've got the solution in the theoretical sense that would work in the real world with the proper conditions of actual federalism. If we went back to the Articles of Confederation and every state had a similar type thing, so the counties could do their thing, then we could move toward those market
And
solutions.
one of those conditions would be deporting some people that vote communist.
Right, right. Right. Hippity hoppity. Yeah. So yeah, so we're in
But
agreement on
that's
that.
the other thing with like with the riots, right? And are the rioters going to get the best of public opinion, things like that? And then there's the other criticism, right? Which is that Trump's compromising deportations by making it too rough or too violent and turning people off for what? For what? Like you're not actually getting that big of numbers, right, etc.
Mhm.
But one of the reasons why there's not that many deportations and it's been so rough is because they're targeting mostly the criminals first,
Yeah.
right? So you're and Trump deported twice as many people as Obama's average in the first year before he got his ICE budget, and he did it targeting almost all criminals.
Mhm.
And the popular support for those actions is just through the roofs.
Yep.
And violent crime is down 20% this year, or 15% this year. Homicides are down 20%. That's 3,500 fewer murders, the biggest decrease in over a century. A whole 9/11 worth of murder saved. So if
Yep.
you want to talk about violence, I think overall he's greatly this ICE thing has decreased violence more than it's increased violence. And they have the plan of 1 million a year because people are talking. Oh, like Fuentes is saying, oh, Trump's not doing mass deportations. I told you, blah blah blah. Um, well, there's no logistical way to get rid of 20 million people, right?
Mhm.
Not any good ones, at least. And so, what they're doing with like their million a year plan, as they do the deportations of criminals, and as like the visa system gets restructured, and as people are identified in other ways through like taxes or different documents or maybe hospitals, and then you like consistently police this over the years to the point where people who visit America just kind of treat it like a regular country and assume that they're not just going to be able to stay
Yeah.
whenever they want. And on top of all that, we have net negative migration for the first time in a century, and much higher than the previous net negative migration from the early 1900s. Like it's a huge swing down. And on top of that, Latin America, South America, turning in a more free direction is going to make it way easier to
Right.
repatriate a lot of people because they're like restoring order does have a human cost, right? Like people's plans are in whiplash. They were told by the Biden people and everybody like at the left encouraged, like, come here, come here, come here.
Yep.
And then it's like, go away, go away, away. And so they're kind of reacting and people are caught up and there's absolutely human cost to it. So Trump is finding like the perfect intersection of effectiveness and like the moral approach.
Yeah.
So I would say he's not at all kind of failing at his goal of doing mass deportations by being too violent, and he's not. I also think he's not going too soft, like some
Yeah.
other people say.
And that's the solution, I think, to the problem of, again, I'm generally mildly pro immigration if that means a certain amount of people who are verified and can add something to the country and things like that. But like realistically, I think that like nobody like I always try to ask people, like, what would it take for you to want to leave your country, the United States, to leave Tennessee or
Mhm.
Texas or New Hampshire to go somewhere else? Like it would have to be pretty bad for me to want to go to Canada, or actually I kind of want to go to Taiwan anyway because my wife's
Well, I
family
did. I left for a while. I was in Asia for like 6, 7 years.
right.
Not
But like
Taiwan, but because
but
it was growing fast. It was the '08 crash and then college, and then I was like, I want to be somewhere
yeah.
with 7% growth, not
Yeah.
1% growth.
Yeah. But for the most part, like somebody with a family who's like a laborer or something like that, like most
Mhm.
people want to stay where they grew up or in the wider culture where they grew up
Totally.
and raise a family, speak their language, eat their food. And obviously in every culture there are going to be people who are the adventurers, and that's good. That we have
Well, even the reason you mentioned, that's a lot of the reasons I came back, as well as
mhm.
like fighting the fight in America versus giving up.
Right, exactly. And so the fact that we have so many people wanting to come here, it's because things kind of suck in their countries. And I'm not one of these people that's like, oh, everything that sucks in every country is down to the United States. But like our foreign
Mhm.
policy is not great. The war on drugs isn't great. The Federal Reserve doing what it does, and the dollar being the reserve currency for the world has all these perverse economic incentives for people to that end up people want to come here. And if we didn't have the war on drugs and Latin America and Mexico were more stable, if the monetary system in all these countries was a lot better, then though economically, politically, those societies would be a lot more stable, and most of
Mhm.
those people could stay there and build lives there. And
It
so
would either
that's
be less tragic to send them back, or they would just leave because they wanted to, because they're like,
right.
hey, I can make a life where my culture is.
Exactly. If I could have the same material benefit, and yeah, most people want to be have strong ties to and or live in their home country, and I think that there's nothing wrong with that. And I think that I, people always try to, oh, if you're anti-immigration or even the slightest bit in favor of immigration reform, you're some kind of racist. It's like, no, like this is destabilizing and affecting the countries that the immigrants come from too. Like so
Yeah.
many
Well,
industrious people who are entrepreneurial leaving a small country, that just destabilizes and makes things worse there. So the whole system is like not good. And so,
and you can address it purely on a values basis, but you can
mhm,
also, like, my favorite kind of racism is intra-British racism. Forget the Germans and Italians and all their problems. I'm still mad at the Southeast English.
right.
Because I identify more with the Celtic side than the Saxon side, and the same areas that fought in the English Civil War,
Hmm.
they migrated to the US, and North and South in England flipped in the migration to the US, and then
Right.
they had the Civil War, the same exact people and the same groups. And uh yeah, so
Yeah.
there's
My
very
people.
consistent, long-lasting value preferences based on
Yeah.
culture.
Where are your roots at, back that far?
My whole family came to the US in the 1600s in
Hmm.
Appalachia, like Tennessee, Kentucky, etc. And
Okay.
then my grandfather moved up to Ohio after World War II to the
Okay.
Rust Belt we and then I lived globetrotting
Okay.
all over the world, Singapore and Europe, and then upstate New York when I was 11.
Yeah. So
So
three.
we have moved around since we left Appalachia.
What part of England did your forebears come from?
Leicester,
Okay.
and that's where the most Padgetts are, and
Hmm.
then Ulster Scots, so Scots
Okay.
Irish.
Yeah. So my three of my grandparents come from lines that go back to like the West. So the line came over. They were like investors in the Virginia Company, and
Mm.
they came over like after the first 20 years of really
After they
bad
saw I was
hard.
working.
Yeah, after the people weren't starving and dying in great numbers. And so same way. So and then my other grandparent, his grandfather emigrated from Scotland in like the 1880s from around Glasgow.
Interesting.
And then so three of my grandparents were Eastern Kentucky, like way
Hmm.
east, like Pikeville. And then my other grandparent, the one from Scotland, ended up down here in Townsend, Tennessee. And so, that you're right. The Appalachian thing is kind of, it runs,
Runs
it,
deep.
it runs pretty deep, and it
It's
is
like,
so
why do I
different.
like Braveheart more than all my Yankee friends? It's like,
Right.
that's that
And
might
why
be
do I
why.
like, I would guess that your music preferences are probably much different than some of your Yankee friends
Maybe,
too.
yeah. I listen to like classic rock as the stereotype of a boring alternate choice than pop. But
Yeah.
yeah, I listen to a lot of different music. Whatever the music I like is, it's not
Yeah.
tied to a genre. It's like I like a certain epicness
Oh
or
yeah.
a vocal, and you find it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but
Cool.
yeah, I'm sure it all ties back to that.
Well,
And then
but
I have one German, 1870s around Pennsylvania.
okay. All right. Yeah. What I always say, people, um, the national road, which kind of goes along what is kind of I-70 now when it gets out to Ohio, like the Germans and the Puritans and all that, they turned right and went north,
Mm,
and the sort of the English hillbillies and the Scots and the Ulster Scots Irish, they all turned left and went south. And
yeah.
in Ohio, where I'm from, around the Dayton area, like there even is like I-70. You go above I-70, it's flatter, it's more German, and south of I-70. And obviously a lot of that is fading, but if you know what to look for in the culture, there's a lot of people from Kentucky, Eastern Kentucky and Tennessee who went to Dayton and stayed south of I-70 and all that. But we're off on a tangent, but it kind of goes back
We
to
talk about that in History 102 a lot, the different original settler groups and the various
yeah.
values. It's like the Midlands are like classical liberal,
Hmm.
Appalachia's like libertarian, the Deep South is kind of authoritarian because they were settled not even by people from England. They were settled by English people who had been in Barbados
Yep.
running slave plantations for 200 years before they
Right.
settled the Deep South. And then you have the Puritan Massachusetts Bay witch burning communist Yankees. So,
Right.
yeah, that's the basic breakdown.
But no, you really see the sort of the Puritan ethic has definitely mutated to become like the progressives of today,
Oh, I
right?
wrote an article about it, breaking it down based on value. They talk about social justice in the same way
Oh
because
yeah.
in the with the high Calvinists, like you were kind of preordained to be going to hell or not.
Hmm.
So the accountability wasn't in the like individual, it was in the group to
Right.
police then because the individual was damned or not anyways. And they had this term where they would say, you know how so with social justice, they say accountability is like the love language of change. They would also call judgment like
Hmm.
love. Say judgment was love
Yep.
because it was accountability. And so, and then they
So
were
the
the most equal parts of England, and they like their Gini coefficient. They highly regulated like the clothes, so you could only have three colors, which is like Bernie Sanders. Why do you need 28 uh,
brands
types
of
of
toothpaste? Yeah.
shampoo or whatever, or deodorant? I think he said, or sneakers.
Yeah.
um, so there's all those overlaps, but they also established Harvard in 1636, 6 years after they came up, settled the Massachusetts Bay Colony. And it wasn't like a regular migration. And these were the high Calvinists. So these guys, and there was the English Civil War, and you had the Church of England, and then you had the Baptists who wanted like total church independence, and there weren't as many of them, and they were like libertarians. And then you have like the moderate Presbyterians who wanted like church federalism,
Hmm.
and then you have the Church of England who's trying to keep their monopoly. And then you have the high Calvinists who are like, no, we want to be the Church of England. We want
Hmm.
to create our own theocracy. And so they were looking bad in the Civil War. So they did a huge, it wasn't like Jamestown where it was like 1,000 people. It took them 50 years to get 1,000 people.
Yeah.
They, at least at sustained levels, they, they had a ship of a few hundred, followed by like 20,000 people that migrated to Massachusetts Bay
Hmm.
so that they could create their own theocracy without blackjack and hookers, so to
Yep.
speak.
Yep.
Um, and so it was like not freedom. They weren't trying to leave religious persecution. They were trying to set up a theocracy.
Right.
And eventually, the Ivy Leagues were kind of forced to introduce the classics and broader theology to stay competitive
Yep.
uh, until like the last 15 years where they got rid of it again.
Yep.
Finally came back to their roots.
Well, and it's interesting, and maybe we could talk about this at another time or something, but like how did it go from that, which is very, and I guess I'm I'm answering the question in my own head, but like you want to do like a theocracy, and then but those again, that same impulse, those same people now are the most sort of anti-Christian and they've replaced like the Bible and their Calvinism with like this secular, the basically the critical theory way of looking
Well, the
at the
pagans
world.
would call that true Christianity, right?
Okay.
Because that's how they attack Christianity, or maybe some Catholic stands would say that that's all Protestantism or something, or like what I would say is no, it's the inversion of Christianity,
Mhm.
because like you're taking love for your
Mhm.
neighbor, which is supposed to be like respect their freedom, and you're
Yep.
turning it into what do you call it? Suicidal empathy.
Right.
And then it's you can go down the list of inverted values, and this is actually a very common thing in Christianity, like especially when Christianity was first spreading through the Roman Empire to a largely slave population. It was interpreted often in this communist way, and people point to those like mobs of Christians kind of burning stuff down as an example of how true Christianity is actually communist. But
Mhm.
it's not at all surprising that a slave population could take up the like liberation theology,
Right.
communist interpretation. And then other people say that leftism is a subversion of external subversion of Christianity, right? Usually they're talking about the Jews or something.
Mhm.
Um, but in reality, it's not an external subversion, but an inversion of Christianity. And you're like, well, then how could something so bad as communism be connected to Christianity at all? And it's because the greater the light, the greater the shadow. It's like
Yep.
what Tolkien says. What's worse, a guy that's a warlord or whatever, or I think he uses not oligarch, but robber baron, who's
Mhm.
just like trying to get what he wants versus
Mhm.
someone who's ruling you with the justification of their conscience, right? That'll be like the
Right.
worst kind of tyranny. So it's kind of an interesting thought when I'm like, what's worse, like communism or Islam? And for a while, I was like, Islam might be better. But then I'm like, well, if communism, it maybe is worse than Islam, but it can flip to Christianity easier than Islam, maybe. So maybe, so that's kind of
Yeah.
like how I think about that,
That's
in a funny
yeah,
way. So like maybe
that's
by making the world communist, we'll get them to flip to Christianity. And then the other thing is we like with our whole globalist project, right? It started out as stopping communists,
yep.
and then we got like more. So like communists are red, we're blue. We got more and more countries blue, and we were so successful. We got all the countries blue into like this globalist cartel, and then they
Yep.
just blinked red, blue, and flipped to red. And we were
Yep.
like, shit, did we just create global communism?
Well,
Because we took out the competitive pressure when we made a cartel, which disincentivized countries from like lowering their taxes or lowering their regulation policy or
yeah.
deregulating, because if no one else was doing it, then you don't have as much pressure to do it yourself. And
Yep.
these rules were standardized internationally to support global oligarchy.
Well, liberal rules based order, right? I mean,
Right.
and you gotta, yeah. And oh man, I have so many other topics I even
Sorry for
thought of.
taking you off on down
No,
that.
no, it's good. I mean, I even think that I think that the elites are really gonna the AI is gonna be their play to to combat, the uh I think there is a strong trend like with Brexit, with,
Hmm.
sort of what we're trying to do with the Mises Caucus, like toward localism
Hmm.
and less globalism. I think that's going to be their play back toward globalism. It's like, look, yeah, the technocrats of the 1970s, we didn't do so good, but now we've got and they're not going to come out and say this
Hmm.
explicitly, but now with AI, like
Now
we're
we can central plan.
yeah, now we can central plan. Now we can have the objectively better moral code, all this stuff,
Well,
and
the irony with that is that if Trump didn't win, the Kamala admin would have regulated it down to three AI companies, like Andreessen said, right?
yeah,
And made sure that it was tightly controlled what they said, which would have killed the AI industry. So ironically, you need like to free the AI for AI to be even successful in the first place, to be able to have the computing power to central plan.
yeah, yeah. That's a yeah.
But I
Um,
don't think they'll central. I think it's more like an AI war. And I'm glad that it's all the AIs aren't on the same side.
I think that's a good thing that it's not nationalized because, yeah, I think generally speaking, different factions fighting with each other is a good thing. And to bring it back to, I think Eric July said something about this, or that, like the Democrats in Minnesota fighting the Trump administration, to me that's like a gang war we need to stay out of. Like if they're training fire on each other, and Gavin Newsom is rejoining the WHO and all this stuff, like all of that strife among political um units at that level, I generally think is kind of good, and that
Well,
we can.
I don't know. I think that sounds like a gang war that we should definitely join if the options are WHO, communism, or deportations and free AI. Like, I'm happy to join that gang war. Sign me up. Give me a club.
Well, that maybe, yeah, we're maybe have another. I'm actually serious. I would want to talk about this when we got some time, but like in particular battles, like if the battle's already going and the bullets are flying, just, yeah, maybe
Well, I think the
after.
Minnesota thing, it should be fine. Like the Minnesota cops are policing it now.
Yeah,
Whatever, maybe it was Timmy got off of his welfare charges. Maybe there's something
yeah,
else happened. Um,
yeah. Well, which goes
but
back to my theory that I think they wanted this because that's, I think, is the one of the.
leverage,
Well, yeah, and also like I think all of uh, the particular states or localities saying we're going to impede ICE or not cooperate or this or that. Like, I think that they're not doing that from a Hoppian reason of like, extreme federalism. They're doing it because uh, they wanted the discord, they wanted the violence to
right?
rile up their base, because just 18 months ago, right after the election, the Democrats were like, hey, do we even have a party anymore? And obviously they did. And this is their playbook. They have to
I mean,
have, as long as
yeah,
Trump is president, they need to use him as a lightning rod to try to activate their people. So
right. And maybe this will be their protection against welfare fraud in more than Minnesota. They're
yeah,
like, you got to create some leverage
yeah,
to protect ourselves from XYZ. It's
right. If
always interesting to think about like what the negotiations are
yeah,
behind the scene because it's
but
all a
that
game of like leverage against leverage.
yep, it is. Yeah. Well,
And
I'm glad.
it's not like people kind of think of it as I don't know, selling out or something, but it would be kind of like considering a Viking army that asked for a ransom to be a sellout. Like, oh, you took gold instead, you didn't conquer the whole castle. What are you, pussy? Like,
Right,
and actually, that conversation did happen sometimes where they're like, we could have taken them, we could have taken it all, or the
right.
soldiers were maybe mad, but like usually when that choice is being made, it's like a smart economical choice.
Yeah. Well, it's really been a pleasure talking to you, and yeah, we'll have you back on at some point, and it's going to be interesting to see as we get closer to the elections just what is going to happen. I think the whole Epstein stuff has kind of been on the background, but I think both sides are going to try
Mm.
to use that in the in the
Yeah,
midterms and all
I put
that. So,
$150 on the Republicans winning the midterm a few months ago,
what are the
because I'm
odds?
like, well, they were pretty low odds, which is why I bet. I was like,
Right.
this is I think an overestimated spread because if you think about it, the districts that were added, right,
Hmm.
you get another 3/4 of potentially 5% growth because of the deregulation,
Okay.
higher or whatever, and then maybe the Ukraine war ends, right? The midterms is a totally different picture.
Yeah, and that's the
And you've
thing.
got
Like,
15 extra seats.
earlier when I said like if it was held today, I think the Republicans would be pretty decisively against them. But the
Hmm.
one thing we all know is like what we're 8+ months out at this. I can't do math and it's late, but like, yeah, that's an eternity. So
Yeah,
there'll be lots of twists and turns, and it's a pleasure to talk to you. Tell Angela I said hello, even though I just talked to her in chat. So, but
sounds good. Will
glad you
do.
guys
Pleasure.
survived. Glad you survived the snow down in Texas, and we'll see you soon. Okay.
Stay safe out there, kids.
Okay. Bye bye.
Peace.